So I hope you had a good weekend. I've done a bunch of grading in Android, but I haven't graded the midterm projects. I'll try to get that done today or tomorrow and work on that. So I think I've got almost everything graded except for those. So hopefully by the end of the week, you'll have an updated grade in this class so you know how you're doing for that. This week we're going to look at database access and using a database in Android. Pretty key idea. Almost every app out there is going to use a database to just store persistent data from one time the app is run to the next time. Also, in Android, it's difficult to pass objects from one activity to another activity and to move them back and forth. So one of the ways we get around that is we'll use a database to store our information or objects and that sort of stuff, and we'll just pass like the primary key from activity to activity. So if we're going from one place to the other, just pass the primary key, and then when we get to the other activity, we can use the primary key to pull up the user's information or the product information or the sale information or something like that. Provides it. It's interesting, Android, and again, I'll try see if we have time to mention that. I think it was Unit 8. We tried to do an example just a week ago or so where we are trying to do multiple tabs and moving data between multiple tabs. And in class, I tried to take some of the static data out so we could pass that information around. And on Friday, I just remember we didn't get there. So I've got that solution ready, and I can show you how we pass that around. We'll see if we can get to that sometime this week, too. But again, we need to look at databases and how to use that. Unfortunately, one of the things Android tends to do is that it often doesn't make things very simple to do. So accessing a database is not as simple as you might think it should be. It is not uncommon to have to create 3 new classes and get them working together in order to access a database and a table in a database. We'll look at a simplified version today with just 2 classes added on to our main activity and using that. Yeah, we'll also then look at more complicated situations. So fortunately, it's not like C# or Microsoft.NET where I can just drag a database object and drop it on my screen and it connects up the database, and I can then refer to any table or any record within that table. Basically, it's all built in. So Android, I've got to build a lot of this in for me. This isn't that uncommon in Java. For Java, a lot of times we do for database access, you've got to do a fair amount of programming here. Java's always kind of been that way, where there's not a built-in standard across the board for data access. There's lots of different libraries, and so and a lot of people are building it from scratch. So we're going to look at an example from the Techopedia website and book. There's actually 3 chapters that cover this introduction to SQLite. So again, the database we'll be using is SQLite. I always want to spell it with 2 L's, SQLite. It's not. I should provide. It's like SQLite. Yeah. It only has 1 L in there. So in most databases you've seen before, the database runs a separate application like Microsoft Access, SQL Server, Oracle, all those stuff. We run our relational database as a separate application on our system. In fact, in Visual Studio, when you run that, it runs a copy of SQL Server as a background process for us. SQLite is different in that it is just a library we add on to our application that does the processing. So we don't have a separate database. It just tacks on this library to our database, or to our normal Java code that gives us the SQL function, the relational database functionality. It's very portable, it's open source, so lots of people are using it, really common out there because of its open source. And again, in a version, in a small environment like a tablet or a phone, we're not going to be running MySQL or SQL Server, a larger relational database in a separate process and intercommunicating with it. So SQLite is really common in these sorts of environments. We'll be looking at this. So if you go to Module 10 and look at the overview of the Android SQLite, we're going to go to that one first and talk about that. Some of this, of course, is old hat for you. Databases, data tables. So we have records, rows, and columns for this. So columns are our attributes, rows are individual records, and we have primary keys. And they talk about some SQL. I assume we've got some basic SQL knowledge. So have you all had database modeling before this class? No? Yes? No? So if not, you'll see some SQL. The SQL we're getting into is relatively simple. Again, you can do more complicated SQL, but for the examples we're doing, we don't need very much SQL. This tutorial walks you through, you can actually connect up to the SQL library and check the databases. Each database will be stored in a DB file with the app. So each app has its own folder out on the Android process, and then inside that there's a databases folder, and inside that whatever you name your database will be the name of the file name and .db. So that's the actual database that will be connected to. And you can actually go out and look and check the database, and if for some reason you wanted to populate a full database out there ahead of time, you could grab this database, bring it onto your your desktop, and interconnect it with some larger database system and populate it or send queries to it, and then move it back out. So sometimes there's actually just a database file out there that you can maneuver. But we generally won't be using this command line interface, and we won't necessarily need to do that for what we'll be doing. Again, they talk about some simple commands, how to insert, how to delete, and again, we'll review those when we get to them. Here, this is what we want to look at, is the Java classes for Android. I'm going to actually go over them in reverse order. So there's a SQLite open helper. This is used to create the database and upgrade it. So the first time we run our app, we'll create the database. Also, when we upgrade our app from one place to another, we usually have to do something with the database then. So we'll talk about that. So there's, we have to link into to this interface, and we have to have two methods defined somewhere. So we'll see those in our code for creating the database and upgrading. So this is where we'll give the database its name, give the table its name, give each field or attribute in the database its name and type. So we'll want a product name field that's a string. We'll want a product ID field that's a number or it's integer, and it will be primary key. So this is where we'll create the database and set up all the tables and attributes in it. Once we have the database created, we'll access that in different ways, and so we have some commands that we can call to run SQL on these. So insert, delete, query are the main ones, and they run the corresponding SQL commands. So insert will run an SQL insert command, delete will run an SQL delete command, query runs an SQL select command, because select is just a query in SQL. There's also some commands that can run any SQL. So because this isn't all of SQL, so there's an exec SQL that can execute any SQL command out there on our database. The insert and delete generally are just going to be commands. They don't return anything. When we get into some complications, when we do a query and we return a bunch of records. So we'll execute a query and we'll get a bunch of records, basically a table result back with columns and rows and that sort of stuff. So how do we handle that? So we have a data structure called a cursor, C-U-R-S-O-R, that we'll be using. Oops. I'm going backwards here. So have you heard the term cursor referring to the result of a database? It's used in a lot of different systems. Returning things, a lot of different systems will process things a little different ways. But again, this is a standard kind of structure for when we get a chunk of data back from a database. It's been around for a long time. Number systems like .NET have moved on to different structures than our cursor. So a cursor generally returns holds the whole result of our database query in it. It's like a big array, basically. It's like a big array or a big table, and has some structure for it. So we'll get back a whole table, a big like array. So you can kind of think of a cursor like an array, but it has an array with a pointer in it that tells us what record we're at inside that. Yeah, so in Access, there used to be this, and I haven't used Access lately, but there used to be this common control where you would say next record, previous record, next record. There might be a new record button in here, and it would be you are at record 10 of 412 or something like that. And then you could go previous record or new record, and just as a control, you drop onto Access forms to move from record to record. That's kind of visually what a cursor is. There's a command to say move to first. Oh yeah, see this cursor had the same thing. There was a move to first and a move to the end button on that too. So the move to first, move to end command, move to last, move to next, and generally a move to previous. I don't see that there, but I think there's also a move to previous one. And an open and a close. Get count to get the total number of rows in your results. And then this get, where once you're in a record, you could get the record, the information, the attributes at that spot. So if you're this spot in your array or your cursor, you could get the different attributes of that record. So let's look at how we're going to set this up. Let's walk through an example. So I'm going to walk through the same example from Techtopia and have you walk through the same thing. So why don't you run Android Studio and bring up a new project. And then we're going to go through what they've done here is they've broken this up into two parts because they wanted to create the user interface first, and they are doing some stuff they haven't covered in class. We're just going to copy and paste the user interface in there, not go into too much detail in it. But we'll do this first, again, in Unit 10, we'll do this Android Studio table layout and row layout first to set it up. But it also kind of walks us through how to set up our example. So let's walk through this. So this is what we're creating. We're creating a simple database of products. Every product will have a product ID, a name, and a quantity, how many we have of that product. We'll have a real simple interface. We can add a new product. So if we type in stuff and hit add, it'll add that product to the database. If we type in a ID and hit find, it'll try to locate that product and display a product name and product quantity. If we have a product here, a product ID, and hit delete, it'll delete the product with that ID. So we can't even go next product, previous product. It's just a really simple interface for a product. So that's what we're going to set up. But first we're going to set up these labels and these text fields and these buttons. And we're going to use that. We've been using like some relative layouts and linear layouts for our stuff. We're going to use something called a table layout for this. Very similar to HTML tables, if you've used those, where we create a table, we create rows in the table, and then we put things in each row of the table. So this will be a whole table, this will be a row, and this will be one thing and another thing in a row. This will be another row, and this will be one thing, another thing in a row. I often just do this by creating a vertical linear layout and then horizontal linear layouts. It's similar in functionality. I don't know why they just didn't do that for this, but you could do that same thing. Okay, here it talks about creating our database project. So we're going to go and do that. I'm going to set this up so I can. Okay, so I've got Android Studio running. I'm going to create a new project. Okay. So give it some name. So name, and then again the domain or the package they'll be using. We'll have to kind of watch those because and again I'm going to give it our own name and not necessarily match the package out there. So we'll just have to watch that. I actually have this saved, all done, out on the R drive classes. So again, this is all done out there, but I think it's useful for you to go through and copy and paste. It just doesn't take too much work to set this up on your own. So we'll just kind of work through this tutorial. I think it's useful. Yeah, the minimum SDK we're not worried about really. We'll do a blank activity. Now, just so you know, it suggests we rename the activity database activity, but I find that confusing. So let's just leave it as main activity because that's what you're used to seeing. So just so you know, main activity is going to be the same thing as their database activity. And same with the other thing we'll have to watch is the layout. Activity main. So this is .java. And activity main .xml is going to be the same thing as their activity database. I just think it's going to be easier for you to remember these as the main ones because that's what you're used to seeing, and it should be fine to leave them as this sort of stuff. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that as main activity and activity underscore main. Leave it all like that. Finish. Let this start up. So again, we're going to create a linear layout here. So we're going to replace our layout with this linear layout, a vertical linear layout, and then we're going to put in rows table layout inside that linear layout and table rows inside that. They walk you through manually creating those. We're not going to worry about those. We're just going to go in and find the code that we need for this layout. So down at the very bottom, then they adjust the margin so everything fits nice and pretty. Finally, down at the bottom of this example is their layout they create. Linear layout with a table layout inside with table rows, and then inside each table row is a table view, two table view text views that we have, and then a row of buttons down at the bottom. So we're going to take this, and they want it to go into activity database.xml. We just have to remember that that's our activity main. So we're going to open up our activity main.xml and paste this into that. Okay, if I stalled long enough, is this up and ready to go? Okay, so here's my activity main XML file. I'm going to go into text view. It's a relative layout. I'm just going to delete that all. Go into the website, find this long linear layout here. Grab that whole thing, this whole linear layout that's at the end of this, right before the summary. Copy that and paste that in here. Now, they actually work with a string.xml file. For simplicity, let's just redo the strings with simple text here rather than putting them in a string.xml file. So let's see, what do we want this to say? Let's see if I have the... Here's my view I want. So I want product ID, product name, and product quantity. So over here, on my form, I want the first one top here to be product ID. And the next one, I'm just changing the text, right? Double clicking and changing the text on each of these. So I got product ID, product name, and product quantity. And then same here, I want it to say add, find. So the buttons, I'm going to double click on them and say add. I guess find and delete. Now in a real world, I would be creating the string.xml files and putting them in there and referring them here. But again, we're not teaching you how to do user interface today, so we just want to get this up and running. Okay, so here's my user interface. I got a couple text views here that I can work with, that I have. So I've got product name is a text field, product quality, and product ID. So these are all have IDs, and I've got my buttons. Buttons are just, I think, labeled button 1, button 2, and button 3 for now for that. So how'd that go? Did I go too fast? Go too slow? So that wraps up this tutorial. Now we'll get into the database. Again, this part was just doing the
keep saying that. It's been saying that for since I opened it. Yeah, it just says executing tasks.
Yeah. So you started a new project, right?
Yeah.
Why is it confused?
Did I copy the right thing?
Looks like you have it copied in here twice. Let's do, this is the right thing. Let's do this again. There, that looks better. So now, just go in here, if you double click on it, type product ID. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the next part of the tutorial where we're going to connect up the database and set up how the database works. So if I go, let's go into our So this is this last tutorial here on the database, SQLite database, and using that. So again, we just want to work with a simple product, keep things really as simple as we can. So there's going to be a product ID, a product name, and a product quantity. The ID is an integer's primary key. The product name is just a text field, and the quantity is just an integer. So we're just going to keep it relatively simple. What we're going to do then is create a Java class to store this information. And that's pretty common when we're working with databases in Java, is you create a Java class with attributes that match the attributes in your database, so that you can take a record from your database, bring it up here, and use it to populate an object in your world. So we're going to create a product class here with an ID, a product name, and a quantity. Okay, so I'm going to go into Java. Here I'm going to go into my main activities are already open. I'm not going to necessarily work with that. That's already there. I'm going to make a new object, a new class. So if you just right-click on this folder, you should be able to say New Java Class to create a new Java class. And it's going to be called Product, capital P for product. So there's our product. Now, the package is already up here. So one thing I want to do is not delete the package, because all these should be in the same package. So I'm just going to go over the code here and see the package up here. That's a different package. Don't grab the package. I'm just going to grab everything from the below the package. So public class product, grab all the way down to the bottom. So here's my public class. I'm just going to highlight that and delete it and put in the new product there. So I've just replaced, I've left the package the same because I want to be in my package. I just want to put the product in here. And again, this has just 3 attributes: an ID, a product name, and a product quantity. Some people run off this standard Java programming thing where all your private variables start with an underscore. I don't like that, but some people do that a lot. So this example, whoever did this comes from that school of thought. So all of our variables here are private, and they have an underscore underneath, starting with them.
I was thinking, when I clicked on favorite class, it said choose the destination.
Oh, yeah, so don't choose the test one, choose the main one. If you right-click on the Java or up higher and choose class, it asks you which folder to put it in. If you just are in this folder already and right-click create class, it'll just put it right in that folder. So that's a shortcut to watch. So again, we have our attributes here, and again, they just have underscores with them. There's a constructor, an empty constructor that does nothing. And then there's a constructor where we provide an ID, a product name, and a quantity. And what is nice, what they do here is, again, so we're giving it an ID. We say this dot ID underscore ID equals ID. And again, when we have this, we're just taking the information they give us and saving it to our local variables for our product. And we just have to remember that the local variables have underscores, which again, some people really like, because then it's the same people who every method has an M in front of it. Have you seen that? Where every method has a lowercase m if it's a private? I forget which one it is, but it's that same school of Java programmers. Okay, we've got a product where we're constructor, we're just given a product name and a quantity. And then we have the getters and setters, set ID, get ID, set product name, get product name, set quantity, and get quantity. And there's nothing special about these as far as the spelling or stuff of the getters and setters. They're just whatever the people did. There are other spots, like in C# where you need setters and getters named certain ways. This, it doesn't matter. We'll be calling these explicitly in our code if we need to. So, pretty simple class for a product, straight out of Java 2, right? Okay, so where are we in our tutorial? Okay, so we created our product. Now we're going to implement a database handler. So we need to create an object called myDBHandler. And this is going to do our open and create database. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to go in my folder here and do right-click, new. Again, if I was up a level, if I do new Java class, it's just going to ask you, do you want it in the main or your test one, and you just want it in main. So if you do it at a high enough level, ask you, just make sure you put it in main. And the class is myDBHelper handler. You might want to watch the capitalization if you're going to, because we're bringing code from other places. So it is doing a capital M, lowercase y, capital D, capital B, and H. And I keep saying helper, but it's handler, right? Handler. myDBHandler. Oops, somehow I got this in the wrong. See, somehow I got this in the wrong package. So I want it up in this package. So it should, all these files, Java files should be together in the same package. So it's not. So I'm just going to, I assume I can just drag this and drop it up here, and it'll refactor it and redo the package name. Okay, that's better. So I should see the package name up here for me. And now I'm going to paste some code in here. So every time we use a database, we've got to have one class that extends or inherits from SQLite Open Helper. So we do this inheritance, and it gives us all the SQL functionality we need. As part of that, it has to implement two abstract methods, an onCreate method and an onUpgrade method. So it has to implement both of these methods that work with this SQLite database. These are both have to import from this. We need both the SQLite database and SQLite Open Helper as part of this. I'm not going to, what they do is they show you this with an empty onCreate and an empty upgrade, and then they walk you through saying, this is what we're going to want to do is put this information in here, and we still have an empty onCreate and an empty onUpgrade. And then they walk you through and say, this is our onCreate, and this is our onUpgrade. Okay, so it gets kind of confusing. I would scroll down past the first one and find the So on my DB handler that has the variables in here, all these static variables, and copy this set of code over there. Okay? So it's not the first one, which is basically empty, it's the second one. And again, I don't want the package. I want to leave out the package. I can do the imports. Those are fine. So I'm just going to grab this code, and it has all these static variables and a constructor we're calling here. I'm going to replace my DB handler with that. So here's what I've got. I've got public class MyDB handler extends SQL open helper, and it has all these private static final database version, database name, table product, column ID, column product name, column quantity. So it has all those things. It has a constructor here from MyDB handler, and it has an empty on create, empty on upgrade. And now I'm going to grab the code for the on create and on upgrade that's given back in the tutorial, and then I'm going to walk you through all this code. So there's an on create code here that I'm going to paste into this on create, and there's some on, and below it is an on upgrade code I'm going to paste. So paste in the on create and the on update code here. For now. And often this is all of our database handler will have, is this on create and on upgrade portion here. So let's talk about what we're doing here. We're going to create a database with a couple fields. There's going to be an ID field in our database, and it's going to be our primary key. There's going to be a product name field, product name, and since this is a database field, there's going to be no spaces in that, product name, all one word, and there's going to be a quantity field, oops, all lowercase too. So that's going to be our database table. We're going to call this table, is going to be called products. And that table is going to be inside a larger database that's called ProductDB. And databases have the DB extension. So to help us use this, I've got lots of strings here. I'm going to declare constants for all of these strings. I've got this string, the name of the database. I've got this string, the name of the product. And I have a string for each of my column names. So I'm going to declare variables for all of that, static final variables to hold all those. So that's what I have here. This is database name. And again, since these are, another practice is that for constants, we declare them final, and we also keep them all in caps. This is our table name. And these are our field names. Our fields are column. So this one is, I just cannot write in all caps. It's something really hard for me to do. So column ID, This one is column product quantity. Okay, so that's all this is doing. Here's the name of all of our fields. Here's the name of our table. Here's the name of our database. And again, if we wanted to you have more things we could do. We could do this without this. We could just put all these strings inside our code and not have static variables, constants for all of them. But again, when we code, we generally don't like putting things in it. It's nice. It moves it all up there, makes it really easy to change your database structure later on. There's also a database version. I'm not going to go over that too much, but when we upgrade an app from one version to another, we sometimes have to change the database and want to make sure the database matches the version of our app that we're running. So again, the version number is just used to kind of keep track of what version it is. And we won't go over that too much. The constructor here simply calls the parent constructor. It specifies the database name and the version number. And so this kind of sets up the database itself with that constructor. Then we call in onCreate, we have to write the SQL to create the database. And you remember writing SQL to create database, the table names and their values. That's all this is doing, is writing the data, doing SQL to create a database. If you don't know SQL, just Google SQL, create table, and there's lots of good tutorials. It's not, all we do is say create table, and then we put in the table name, and then we put parentheses and then column ID. And this is a lot of mix of constants and strings. So sometimes it's useful to write this out. What is this actually writing out? So if I were, I'm going to create this string without all this stuff in here, and just so the table products is actually just product. So this is there, and then I start with my column ID is just underscore ID, and specify integer primary key, and then I include the product name. Oops. Here. And then do text. So sometimes I actually run the debugger and see what this string actually looks like to verify it. Sometimes I actually just take out the variables to make sure everything works well. So like here, the quote plus column identifier quote plus quote. I'm just going to replace that with the actual variable amount up here, which is this quantity. And then we end up with a bracket at the end. So this is the SQL command that's being executed. Create table products, parenthesis ID, integer primary key, comma, product name, text, comma, quantity, integer, parenthesis. So that is the string I'm creating. And that's just SQL, right? That's standard SQL to create a table. I'm going to comment that out. I don't really need that. But that's all this plus and this mix of these constants and these strings are doing, is creating that SQL command. And so that's often you write out the SQL command. Tell you the truth, sometimes I just run Microsoft Access or SQL Server, some visual thing, I create the table and I look at and I just grab the SQL from that and paste it over to Java, and then where the constants are, I just put quotes around them and insert the constants names. So that's creating my table. Again, we're not going to worry right now about upgrading our database and doing that. So right now, when you upgrade the database, it deletes all the old data and recreates the new data. Good luck on your interview. So it deletes the old table and recreates a new table. You probably don't want to do that whenever you upgrade. It would be really bad if you upgraded from your app and you lost all your contacts or something like that. Every once in a while, when I upgrade, I'm amazed at how bad the upgrade goes on Android. I mean, it deletes or loses my preferences or settings or stuff like that. Don't like that. Okay, so that's my database stuff. Now we're going to add some more stuff in there. Now, basically, we've got a product class, and then we've got this MyDB helper class. And then we've got this database, the main activity class. That are going to talk to each other. And both of these are going to use this product object in some ways or another. We're going to often we have a DB helper class with what we have in it, and we have another class for the data access stuff, all the SQL commands to insert, delete, and stuff. Later on this week, probably on Wednesday, we'll look at an example with that. But in this first example, we're going to put the data access stuff in here, rather than putting it in a separate class. So after the upgrade, on upgrade and on create, I'm going to add a couple more classes here to do the basic things I want, and that's an add a product. So I'm going to grab the add product and paste it in there. Grab the find a product and paste it in here. And then grab the delete product and paste